People who quit a job in the heat of the moment, what shit show did you leave them to handle? Story 1. Shoppers f***ing Drug Mart. I had simply asked for better hours after working ridiculously late night hours for over a year. Instead, they hired a new guy and gave him the exact hours I asked for, and then had me train him. So when training wasn't going very well because the new guy was super slow, they blamed me for it. Now, I had a good standing with everyone at the store, but I didn't need shoppers and I let a lot of shit slide every day. So again, when I asked for a vacation that I deserved because I was never sick and punctual as hell, I was denied it. The next day, the manager had 4 weeks of vacation set. So to make it up to me, they offered me all these insane overtime shifts for the next 3 weeks. So I waited for the frozen deliveries to arrive that same day. The boss was packing up to go home, and when he said goodnight to me, I said, "But who is going to do this frozen delivery?" He laughed and said, "You are." So I replied, "Nope." He became super cross, so I started laughing. "What are you laughing about?" He says. So I said, "F yourself. I quit." Now there was no one to finish the night shift. He immediately asks for the uniform. Lol. Nah, I said f yourself. I quit. I had never done that before or since. The uniform went in the trash. That's the shit I'm looking for. Of like that instant karma type shit. Story 2. It took me many years and many jobs to learn this. But one of the worst things you can do as an employee is to be too accommodating. If you're the rare employee who tells them open availability and is reliable to the point where you never miss work, then management, especially in things like retail, is going to abuse the shit out of that. It's not even usually anything personally against you, it's just they need those hours or days they know most people will flake out on filled and they can't afford to have someone not come in. So, the guy or gal that will put up with anything is going to get the shaft. Every single time. Your career also likely isn't going anywhere either. Oh sure, you'll often quickly get those stage 1 meaningless promotions, but you're way too valuable for them to ever make a real manager or anything, though they'll often shovel a lot of that responsibility onto you anyway, because, again, you're the employee that can be trusted to do any shit work. After a lot of years of putting up with that, I guess I had an epiphany. I stopped bending over backwards so much I wasn't afraid to get a schedule at a new place and mark off certain days or times I wasn't available. Don't get me wrong, I'm still a reliable, punctual, hardworking employee, but I'm not afraid to sometimes say no now. And the thing is, it has paid off immensely. Both my work-life balance and the fact that I wasn't a job guy, so I got promoted up the ladder. Story 3. I worked as a small engine repair tech for a larger company. I'm also in the National Guard. I had gotten hurt and needed physical therapy in 1 or 2 days a month I would have to miss because of an extended drill weekend. Well, my boss didn't like that, and she decided that she would punish me by making me stay later than everyone else. She was punishing me for going to physical therapy for a workplace injury and for being a soldier. Now you may be thinking, having to stay late to keep up with your work doesn't sound like that much of a punishment. Normally you would be right, but trust me, she was doing a lot more to make sure it was a punishment. Well, one day after being told that I was not given approval for the 1 day of vacation, I asked for 3 months in advance to go see the eclipse. And generally being treated like a slave, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And clocked out at the end of my shift. The next Monday after drill weekend, I showed up, packed up all my tools, and took off. My boss started freaking out when she saw what I was doing. I left and found out that me leaving cost her over $100,000 because she had to ship my workload to another state to get another shop to work on them. That meant she needed to pay to ship them and then pay to ship them back, and since her shop didn't do any of the actual work, she never saw any money for any of the repairs. It was over 80 riding mowers. Story 4. 18 years old, assistant manager at a big pizza franchise, had been working open to close for 2 weeks straight because the new general manager went on vacation right after taking over the store. When she got back from her vacation, she worked half a day. I opened and still closed, then she changed the schedule and took 2 days off. This was the last straw on top of a ton of other shit piled over a year. Multiple new GMs, district manager, awful store politics. I was alone during an unusually large lunch rush and was just done with everyone's shit. I had a make line full of orders, phones ringing, an oven full of pizza, orders to be picked up, and a massive batch of dough sitting on the prep table. I said, fuck it. I shut the oven off, walked out, and locked the store. Didn't call anyone to let them know. It would be hours before the evening driver would roll in. No prep for the day, no dough for the day except for the blob that I'm sure would become a massive mess after rising for hours, a double-deck oven with both belts full of pies wasted, and what was probably shaping to be a $1,200 lunch out the window. I hope she was well rested after her time off. Story 5. I got stabbed in the shoulder while working as a bookmaker, betting shop manager. I was the only key holder, and while the paramedics were tending to me, the area manager was on the phone asking me to open the store the next day. I closed the shop for the day, came back once I got out of the hospital, put my keys in the safe, and left my notice on the desk. The store didn't open for 3 days while they sorted a field manager. Story 6. Worked as the engineer at the mill and was responsible for the operation and process adjustment of a certain piece of equipment. Made it work with better than specified results, but my managers required more production, less power, etc. So at the point when the machine reached its capacity, further pushing was very risky and a huge amount of investment was needed. I was told by brass, "You didn't even try to do it, and only say some lame excuses." I was full of this shit and called the manufacturer of this equipment. Long story short, instead of instructions and pieces of advice, they sent me a job offer for a local service rep. After I quit the mill, my ex-colleagues tried to push the machine above the limits and successfully broke it, and stopped production for a couple of weeks. Story 7. Oh boy, let me tell you about my last day at Walmart. It's Monday morning, my day off, and I was pulling out of Doc Anderson after getting blood work done, when I receive a call from my manager. Let's call her Douche Canoe. Douche Canoe asks me to come to work because of 2 call-offs. Thinking that I did not have anything else planned, I could use the overtime. I agreed. I informed her over the phone it would take me an hour to get home, dress, and drive to work. All I heard was an annoyed, "Fine, just get here." 1 hour later, I arrive at work. Just as I was getting to the deli, where I work, my manager, who was behind the counter by herself, starts yelling at me for being late, in front of not 1, not 2, but a line of customers. I attempt to remind her of her conversation, but she cuts me off, tosses me her apron, and storms out of the deli. I'm forced to shrug it off, apologize to the customers, and get to work. Later, I have a customer walk to the deli and ask about a rotisserie chicken, something not uncommon. I explain it will be over an hour before they are ready and suggest driving 5 minutes north to the other Walmart. He nods, thanks me, and walks away toward the front. I thought nothing of it and continued to cook popcorn chicken. 5 minutes later, the same customer comes back with none other than Douche Canoe, who is asking me about the rotisserie chicken. I, once again, attempt to explain how long the chicken has left to cook, and the suggestion I made. No sooner than when I finish speaking, she berates me for being lazy and telling a customer to go elsewhere. I ask what else is there I could do, as I couldn't make the oven cook faster. Her next words stick to this day. "I want you to do your damn job, or you can kiss it goodbye." A moment of pause from everyone. Zoe and May have been listening in the entire time, as well as the customers they were helping. I ponder, then smile. Okay. I apologize to Zoe and May and wish them the best of luck and walk out of the deli toward my manager. I stop in front of her, take off my apron, kiss it, say goodbye, and walk out of the store. I still have my name badge and hat to this day. Chad move. Story 8. I worked for 25 years for a large company in the sales division. I was making 6 figures and had earned my role as VP of the West Coast. My plan was to stick around until retirement, but then we got a new president, and the new president was an asshole to everyone. I saw one sales guy walk up all excited and offer a handshake to meet him. The president didn't shake the extended hand and instead said, "I can't believe you came here without polishing your shoes." The president gave the directive for me to stop hiring people with business or sales experience and to start just hiring attractive men and women, because
their good looks will sell the product better than the educated words of a veteran salesperson. Plus, they're young and work cheaper.
I went along with this request and made 2 such hires. Then the next request came along.
Tell me who is the worst member of your team right now.
I explained my team was number 1 in the company and we're all doing well. But the weakest was an 8-year employee who had a bad year last year. He was making less frequent calls and the quality of calls was dropping. I had to place him on a PIP, Performance Improvement Plan, to improve in 3 months. And he did. He busted ass and worked long hours and weekends, and moved into the number 1 spot in my team. At the end of the 3 months, the president calls me to discuss the PIP. I explained the great progress and that I want to release him from the PIP because he's on track now. The reply was, "Well, there are probably other things wrong with him anyway, so terminate him and document it. Make sure to hire a young, attractive person as a replacement." I quit on the spot with 0 days notice, unusual for a white-collar job, and told him to do his own dirty work. Now I work as a high school teacher, lol. Story 9. When I was a programmer at an insurance company, one of the longtime programmers had been with the company for nearly 20 years. This guy originally wrote most of the financial system himself, from scratch, and had maintained it with the help of a couple of other people. Every month he did the month-end processing, and every quarter he did the quarter-end processing. Every year-end, yep, it was him. There was a change in management a couple of times, and he kept getting treated worse and worse. He was being treated unfairly, asked to do unreasonable more work than he was already doing, getting thrown under the bus, that kind of thing. He finally had enough, and one morning he came in, walked to the manager's office, and quit, then walked out the door. In the aftermath, it took a team of 4 other people months and months to get things back together and to a point where things were serviceable. Story 10. I worked in shipping and receiving for a health food store. Over the past 5 days, everyone else had quit, including supervisors and department heads. I was working on a frozen shipment, my regular job. Dairy came in, cheese came in, a bit over $130,000. Huge fancy cheese and whole wheels, a large generally organic dairy shipment. I refused to sign any damn thing. General manager demanded I sign and put it away. The signing was already out of my pay grade, those numbers were way the hell out of my pay grade. He then demanded I put it all away. It would have taken the rest of my shift for my own work. I just quit. Fuck it. Heard he signed it in and it all went to waste. He was fired. Story 11. I've only done this once in my life, but it was a really crazy situation. My first professional job was an event planner for a small business of 3 people. I was 24 and I worked there for a year. After about 5 months, my boss became extremely abusive. She would make little snide remarks about my terrible skills or time management or organizing. She stopped talking to me and would basically act like I wasn't there unless it was to criticize me for something. One day, she asked me if I implemented a new filing system she had learned from the bank she used to work at. I replied no, as she hadn't yet shown me how to do so. She said, with a stack of papers in her hand, "Well, I guess giving you these would be fucking useless then." Another example is that she would find little ways in which I was being parred or snide in some way, usually something completely would make me sign forms saying we had meetings about my behavior and listed all the things we would do to change it and help me grow. Like I worked for a big corporation or something with an HR department, and not a private office with literally one boss. If I argued about why I wasn't doing so, she made me sign something saying I was refusing training. I literally have no idea who those papers were for. Stuff like that. It made me so paranoid and unhappy, I spent many lunches crying in my car and many nights stressed out completely after work. I couldn't understand what had changed and felt so stupid and helpless. My coworker had just left, so it was just the 2 of us. And I gave my 2 weeks because the thought of being alone in an office with her was unbearable. As soon as I left her office, she called her mom to complain about me ditching her and talked about how happy she would be with me gone. While I was about 10 feet away in another room with the doors open. I lost it, got up from my desk and grabbed my purse, went to her office and told her that I was leaving for good. Right this minute. I was shaking and terrified and she was furious. She told me, "Good luck finding another job in this town. I know everybody." Spoiler alert, I did. The kicker, what I didn't know at the time was that my coworker had been feeding her the whole time. When it started to affect how I was being treated, and I would complain or talk about it, guess who also told my boss all of that? Yep. With many embellishments, of course. I had 0 experience with people like that and overlooked many clues, like how she would stay after work a lot to finish her assignments, while in reality she was staying to tattle on me, because I was so new to the real world and naive. I found all of this a few months later from one of her friends I ran into who she also had screwed over in some way. It made me stronger, and after I left my boss had to deal with scrambling to find people to do all her events, and I'm sure it was hell. I felt happy about that at first, but now that I'm 10 years older I can see things differently. She definitely could have handled it better, but it was her first boss job too, and she maybe had some things to learn herself. Story 12. I was working as a bag teller and the assistant branch manager and manager were horrible. Total gossip and spreaders. They had no qualms about treating staff like absolute I was often picked on because I was interested in dark things. Apparently reading Dracula during my lunch break in the break room was considered freakishly morbid. I worked there for a little over a year, and shortly before I left, another employee left because of the bullying. She had been there for years, a total sweetheart of a woman, and wouldn't hurt a fly if she could avoid it. She called me in tears the day she quit because she just mentally couldn't take it anymore. Her husband had begged her to leave. It was affecting her mental health that much. One day I was sick as a dog but had dragged myself in because I was only scheduled for a half day anyway, and they begged me to come. As the morning ticked by, I was feeling worse and regretting my decision to try and suck it up. The manager told me I could go home after she got back from her meeting. She had her Chamber of Commerce meeting for the morning, then spent the next 2 hours waltzing in and out of the branch and blatantly ignoring me. It was dead as f*** in the middle of winter with a full teller line, so there was no reason she couldn't just let me go home. The longer the morning went on, the madder I was getting. It was rapidly approaching the time I was scheduled to leave in the first place. I was running a fever, dead on my feet, and feeling weak and dizzy. Regular customers who came in were asking me if I was alright because I looked like death walking. At one point, I muttered to myself that this was bullshit. I didn't say it in earshot of customers, the branch was completely empty. A few minutes later, one of the other tellers then excused herself from the line and went into the assistant manager's office. As soon as the manager waltzed in again, the assistant manager went running into her office and shut the door. The manager then came storming out and over to my station and demanded I get in her office now. I flat out refused. By this point, it was just f***ing done. Mentally, physically, every sense of the word done. I would have been damned if I was going to let this scream me out in a day when I was feeling like death, and I had done her a favor by coming in at all. The look on her little piggy face will be carried forever in my heart. How f***ing dare I speak to her that way? Didn't I know who she was? She demanded I get in her office again. I refused again. I could see the other tellers on the line looking back and forth between us. She narrowed her eyes, and I swear to God, I thought she was going to stamp her feet. If I didn't get into her office now, then I was done. I told her, fine. She came storming around the teller line and told me to start counting out my drawer and balancing out. I did. Packed up my and went home and crashed out. A couple of months later, she was arrested for embezzling something like $500,000 in customer accounts, even opening $80,000 in credit cards under her elderly parents' names. She lost everything. Got sent to jail for something close to a decade. I took great delight in her downfall. When the news broke, the other employee who had quit called me on the phone laughing. It still warms a small area of my heart to think about it. Story 13. Gaming site I used to write for. This all happened in the span of 2 months. The new owner made us writers lose all credibility by writing unedited articles on his own and posting them freely. They were the most widely ridiculous and racist pieces I'd ever read. In one of them, he said women only bought the Wii because they used the Wii remote as a vibrator. It made the rest of us look bad. He fired my friend simply because he didn't like him. He tried to claim my friend kept our review copy of Skyward Sword. There was more stuff that he did that I can't remember. My father died in December of that year. I informed everyone. I also lost internet access for a while because my provider was switching the way the routers and stuff connected. I had too much going on at that time to deal with that. When I connected to the McDonald's Wi-Fi one day, I read a barrage of emails from the new owner, all amounting to, "Where the f*** are you?" and "Why aren't you writing anything?" I emailed him and CC'd everyone in the writing staff and told him he could go f*** himself. 90% of the writing staff followed. 5 writers quit that day and people took notice. The site never recovered, and today it only exists as a landing page and hub for one podcast that just refuses to die. After that, the owner took to stalking the guy who hired most of his writing staff, online harassment, and most recently, he hacked the previous owner's email and stole his Destiny 2 review code. He's still out there being a but I only hear about it since I have him blocked on all social media.
What's your best fire me, I dare you moment from work? Story 1. Worked for a newspaper, editing and actually putting the paper together, arranging it all, placing stories and pictures where they need to be, titling, quoting, and sourcing everything. I was a one-man team and used an overly complicated system that I figured out how to use really effectively. They treated me like set impossible deadlines and berated me for not meeting them. One day, the boss tells me to fully put a paper on by the end of the day and gave me no warning. I had no articles from the journalists and no photos from photographers. It was my job to collect that all from everyone, and he wants me to do it in a single day? I told him no, and if he wants it done, he has to give me more time. He tells me if I don't have it done by the end of the day, I'm fired. I tell him that this paper can't function without me. He tells me I need to take the day off and cool my temper, and that he'll do my job for me. Get a call an hour later after I get home that he needs me to come in and do it, and I can have as much time as I need. Probably quit on that your shit newspaper. Story 2. Worked a job where I was the only one who knows how to take apart, clean, fix, and put all the equipment back together and do the weekly and monthly maintenance. Had a boss tell me one day that I was doing a poor job and not doing enough and that anyone could do it. If I didn't step up, I would be fired, or else, as they had manuals for each piece of equipment. So that night, I took apart all the equipment, weekly and monthly stuff too, cleaned them, and then just left it apart for them to figure out that morning. Then I turned off my phone after getting home for the entire day as I had the day off. When I turned it back on the next day, I saw that I had initially received angry texts ordering me to return and put everything else back together. This lasted an hour. Then text saying I risked being fired. Then text begging me to return. Then more text trying to compromise with OT. Then an apology before nothing else for the rest of the day. Other than that, the head boss wanted to see me as soon as I came in the next day. Came in the next day and over half the stuff was still not put together, and what had been put together was put together haphazardly and would need to be taken out again and then put back in correctly. Was immediately asked to be seen by my boss and their boss to explain myself the moment I was seen entering. Once in the office, I had told them that if they weren't there to apologize, then just fire me then and there or drop it and let me put all the stuff back together. They looked at each other and then told me that I could get back to work. Boss never called me lazy again. Should have asked for a raise too, lol. Story 3. When I was 17, I worked a summer holiday job at Pizza Hut. I had transferred to my hometown restaurant from my university town restaurant. I was there for 5 weeks and hadn't been paid yet. The dickhead boss claimed it was because I gave him the wrong employee number. I hadn't. Anyway, after 5 weeks of no pay, I rang him on New Year's Eve, the busiest night of the summer, and said I wasn't coming to work because I wasn't a volunteer and I wasn't going to work for free. He told me if I didn't go to work, I might as well not come back as I would be fired. I didn't go to work and had a fun New Year's instead. Then a few days later, I called the employment tribunal, I'm in New Zealand, and I told them what had happened. They called my dickhead boss, he then called me, offered me my job back, and was nice as pie for the rest of the summer. Story 4. I worked at an unspecified telecom a few years ago. I was a senior manager in charge of programming, third-level support, and production support. A business unit bullied through code changes made by the business side through a side deal with a legacy programmer in the data center, circumventing my team QA and production testing that just had to get implemented immediately without going through any testing at all. I refused and the CIO overruled me. 72 hours later, phone activations had ground to a halt, customers nationwide were screaming, and the CIO called phone conference after phone conference demanding timelines from when I was going to get this shit fixed. He kept screaming to have members of my team get on the phone and explain themselves to him. I refused. Finally, I snapped and told him that if he wanted me to fix his mistake, I would need to get off the f***ing phone and go work with my teams. And the only reason they hadn't walked out yet was that I was keeping him off their ass, but we would all happily go together. 24-ish hours later, Q&A and my team had the shit cleaned up and fixed for a clean rollout. This was all to avoid a 24-hour delay for Q&A/production testing. I wish I could say that was the only worst time. Story 5. My husband was having his gallbladder taken out and was having complications before surgery. I needed to leave early from work for about 2 hours and my boss threw a fit stating I couldn't leave. I told her I had 300 hours of sick time I can use for myself and my husband, and if she wanted to push, I'd take all of it at once, leaving no one but her to do my job. She said she'd fired me if I tried. I just looked at her and said, I have to go, I'll send you my doctor's note. I wasn't fired. I was actually awarded that year for job performance. Story 6. Over the first year I worked there, I essentially took over most of the tasks in my department, which were previously held by other departments and were done badly because of it. This led to a massive increase in productivity. I then found out I was paid significantly less than what others were making and others in my position across the industry were making. So I go to my boss and tell them I had done all this work, increasing productivity, and I would like to discuss a raise. They said no. So I worked there for another year, asking for a raise every now and again until I was offered a job that paid double. It didn't start for a couple of months, so I held on to that job until I was set to submit my 2 weeks. I asked for a raise again, thinking, well, why the hell not? My boss goes off, tells me I won't get a raise, and says some very colorful things about it. It culminated with her telling me, if you don't like your pay, maybe we should evaluate your future at this company. To which I replied, I already have. I took another job and this was your last chance to offer me what I deserve. I quit and walked out of that office. Friends told me that my sudden departure caused a massive backup of work that ended with my manager being fired for it. Story 7. For the past few years, I've worked at one of the nicer restaurants in my small beach town. I'm one of the only servers there who care about doing good, and I'm the only one who doesn't take a smoke break every 15 minutes. This past summer, a new, very illegal rule was implemented that if we messed up an order in any way, we would be liable to pay for that messed up food. I usually didn't have a problem with mess-ups, so I didn't bring up the legality of this matter since I make good money and I don't want to start fires in places that don't concern me. That was until I rang in a cherry-glazed burger instead of a cherry-glazed steak, each stylized CGB and CGS in our computer system. I fixed this with the kitchen, but not before they had already started the burger. I told my manager and she just gave me a disappointed look and told me that the rules are the rules. I then dived into both federal and state workers' rights codes and told her that she would never see me again if I found any money out of my tips at the end of the night. Never had a problem fixing an order again. Story 8. Was working in a restaurant and already knew I was sick, but our managers were assholes and I knew if I called in, they'd be extremely pissy. Showed up to work around 8 a.m. and by 9 a.m. I knew I wasn't gonna last the rest of the day. Managers still made me stay. Around 9:30, I was pre-bussing my tables and just the sight of half-eaten food pushed me over the edge. Managed to hold my vomit until I got to the dishwashing area, but puked in a trash can immediately after putting my plates down. A coworker saw me and vouched for me when I went to tell my manager I was leaving for the doctor. He said, "Even with a doctor's note, if you leave work today, you'll be fired." I said, "You have human waste in a kitchen trash can and haven't even done anything about it. It's on camera. I'm leaving." Showed up for work a few days later and didn't hear anything about it. I ended up quitting a few weeks later for a job at a couple of considerably higher scale restaurants. Story 9. Put in my 2 weeks notice at a wildly understaffed job. 6 days later, got sick. I called around and see if anyone can take my shift. No one's available. Tried to call out that morning. The manager tries to persuade me to come in even though I'm barfing everywhere. I non-committal agreed to call in later in the day to see if I'm feeling up to coming in any way. Call back and say I'm still sick and will not be coming in. Manager blows up at me in front of customers, being rude as Eventually asks what I expect to do about the shift that needs to be covered. I say I have done everything I am required to and it sounds like a management problem to me. Hang up and turn my phone off. Story 10. I was elbows deep in an AT&T Unix machine that should have been replaced a decade before. Parts were strewn all over a desk when the client came in to see what was taking me so long. Me. You've got 3 dead fans, one of the power supplies has failed, there's a bad CMOS battery, and the video card is glitchy and refusing to allow the machine to post sometimes. Client. So how long is that going to take? Like 15 minutes? Me. Laughing. I can patch things up in a couple of hours, but I'm going to have to come back in a few days with new parts. Client. If you can't fix it in the next half hour, you're fired. I'll find someone that knows what they're doing. I stood up, grabbed my tools, and started walking. Client. Where are you going? Me. I told you how long it would take, and that's longer than half an hour, so I guess I'm fired. My firing lasted about 3 more steps toward the door. Man, oh man, do I hate bossy people who do not even know how things work. Story 11. 2004, worked at a municipality department. One day, the programmers update the work PCs and block pretty much everything and anything. No internet at all, with no authorization for installing anything, and all games are removed from Windows, and they even removed the calculator function for some reason. Then the supervisors started moving coworkers around and my entire team was dispersed across a gigantic building for no reason. We were the top team in terms of results. The supervisors simply hated our guts for some reason. So me and one of my coworkers tried to devise some way to communicate without having to travel for 5 minutes each time, across the building and down a floor, just to get to each other's desks and ask a simple yes or no question. We do this during our lunch break. Our supervisor butts in and asks what we're doing. We explain we're trying to save time and maximize communication and results. The supervisor, who doesn't like us anyway, says we should get back to work and quit trying to communicate through unauthorized means. Okay, we simply stop trying to install Messenger on our phones. One day later, the supervisor is looking for my coworker. I don't know where he is. I say so. Well then, contact him through your Messenger program. The one you told us to quit installing? Yes. We gave up on that, on your orders. She tried to get me fired for refusing to obey basic orders. I explained the situation to her superior, and he let me get back to work and told me to ignore her from then on. I moved to a better post a few months later because she made my life unbearable from that day on, and I finally went and told the upper floor they'll either move me elsewhere or I quit. Story 12. My dog became very ill quite suddenly and he needed to be put down. I was at work and I asked to leave half an hour early so I could be there for him. I asked my manager and she got annoyed and said there was no way and that I should have told her earlier. I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize my dog was going to die," in the most sarcastic way possible, then walked away knowing she'd follow me. I then stood at my desk and typed my resignation up in front of her. She gave me the time off. No one was going to stop me from being there for my boy. Story 13. I was working at a shoe store in a mall and I requested a week in August off for my wedding. My manager told me her boss wasn't happy about that and all I said was, my wedding is more important than back to school sales. They didn't fire me per se, they just stopped scheduling me and eventually my access to the employee website went away. Story 14. I used to work at a small family-owned grocery store a few years ago. We got our load in on Mondays and Thursdays and we got passed over one Monday and the distributor said we'd get the missing load in on Thursday. So what essentially happened was a double load and my 2 receiving partners were out sick. I was the only person in the warehouse receiving at the time and got to take on 15 plus pallets of groceries that needed to hit the shelves immediately. I was specifically told to not go up front and to do what I could while the front-end crew covered the aisles and cash registers. Well, a lot of them were either lazy, untrained, or just putting in their hours so they could pay bills. I put in my earbuds, just one, and got to work. I'm halfway through checking in the pallets when I get called up front. So I ignore it and continue. Then I get called again. So I head up there and get yelled at by a new hire with a bad attitude to do your job and bag for me. The customer was a regular. We got along very well, and she told me that she was fine and could bag her own groceries. Between the customer and the fact that I wasn't having it, I walked away. I had 3 years and 2 ranks on her, so I didn't give half a shit and went back to my pallets. Then I get the newest hotshot manager who replaced the old hotshot manager who replaced the beloved manager who trained basically the whole store in my face about having an earbud in on the clock, which is allowed as long as you have an ear free, and said I could be sent home and not come back if I wanted to listen to music. So I gestured to the pallets and said, "Go for it, these all need to be checked in and broken down. Have fun." I got to keep my earbud in, so I had that going for me, which was nice. Story 15. In the first kitchen I worked in, they told me the more jobs I learned, the more I'd get paid. Came in basically knowing all of it anyway. 6 months later, I had learned every job there except one spot. They told me if I learned that spot, I'd get a raise. I told them I could find a new kitchen. I was easily one of the best employees there. And that I was told the more I learned, the more I'd get paid, and I still hadn't been given a raise. Head chef cracked and gave me a raise. I told him 50 cents wasn't enough. He was forced to give me another. 2 weeks after that, they fired the banquet chef's assistant. We had a lot of 300 plus people at events, and told him to pick his new assistant, and he immediately requested me. I told them I needed another raise. I was told no again. Again, I said I'll find a new job, came in the next day and put my 2 weeks in. Yep, found the job that quick. Wound up making more money in that kitchen than anyone besides the banquet chef and the head chef. That's how I wound up getting 3 raises in a month. Story 16. Important note, my usual job was 3 a.m. to noon and I was sleeping from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. A split shift meant working 4:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. and coming back to 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., if I remember right. I had been working a series of split shifts and the wacky sleep schedule was really getting to me. I was told I would only need to do it 3 days in a row, but then it became 4 days, and then finally I went to sleep after the 4th shift, got woken up by my boss calling me and telling me I would have to work 1 more split shift. I told him no, and that I would come in for my usual schedule. He started to argue with me and asked me why it was a big deal, especially since I had worked it almost every day this week, so why not work 1 more? When I explained I was having issues with sleep and that I wouldn't come in, he was like, "But it's your job. I am scheduling you for another split shift." And I just yelled at him, "Then I don't need this job." He started apologizing and that he would let me get some sleep. I hung up. I went to work the next morning for my usual split, and everyone there was surprised to see me. My boss had told everyone he thought I might not show up at all and wasn't sure if I had quit. I worked my usual shift. My boss came in at 8 a.m. and began apologizing right away when he saw me. Then he said, "If working a split was so hard on you, you could have told me no." I just turned around and went to lunch. Story 17. Told my boss 2 weeks in advance that I was taking PTO on Monday and Tuesday. She approved it with no problem. I take the days off and went out of town for a school thing. I come back into the office on Wednesday and I'm locked out of my account. I talked to the operations manager, my boss's boss, who was a person who interviewed and hired me to see what was going on. He told me that my boss said I disappeared and didn't contact anybody for 2 days. I explained it to him and he said no problem. I talked to my boss later in the afternoon and she's furious. Starts saying how I didn't tell anybody that I was taking PTO and thought I just suddenly quit. I don't know what the this was talking about because I told her 2 weeks ago that I was going to be out those 2 days and I have all the emails to prove it. At this point, I was the only person left on my team of 4 people who were there when I was hired. I was already planning on quitting in next month as I had to move out to school. This had the audacity to threaten to fire me. I said, "If you feel like you need to let me go for your mistake, go ahead." Ended up working there for another 7 weeks before leaving on my terms. Even got to use the operations manager as a reference for another job. Story 18. I worked at a cancer nonprofit. Hired a lady who knew about us because her kid had cancer. My boss wanted me to fire her because she had to come in late or leave early to take her kid to chemo. I refused. Boss said she'd fire me if I didn't. I told her she could go right ahead. Our CEO said no way. Story 19. I worked at a Burger King as a teenager. One day, the assistant manager, who illegally brought her teenage daughter to work to help her out, asked me to clean the restrooms. It wasn't my normal job, but I didn't mind. I had a good attitude about it and prepared to go clean the bathrooms. I walked into the men's room and discovered that the reason she asked me to do it was that someone had shit all over the bathroom, smeared fecal matter on the walls, the sink, the floor, and the outside of the toilet. The toilet was clogged and hand wet and used toilet paper inside and all over the room. It was a complete disaster. I walked out of the bathroom, went back to the kitchen, and told the assistant manager, "I'm not cleaning that. You can fire me, but I'm not cleaning it." She sighed heavily and went and got a mop. Story 20. I was in the military and was trying to take my vacation time before I lost the days. They denied my requests 4 different times, and I hadn't had a day off in 3 months, and I was working 12, 16-hour shifts most days. I was beyond done. I was teaching some new guys part of the tasks for one job. Everything was fine. I went somewhere else in the hangar to do something else on the plane. This quality assurance guy that everyone knew was a pain came in. I did my stuff good and he never bothered me, so I didn't pay him any attention. He started talking to one of the new dudes. He then asked to talk to me and pulled me aside. He then asked me if I hadn't told the new guy about some super obscure caution about water under a grate in the hangar floor. Something that had nothing to do with our job, so it didn't matter. He was just being a pain. I was over the job and him, so I told him, "Listen, Sergeant Roberts, I've been denied my leave 4 separate times and I've been working for 3 months straight. So if you have a problem with the way I taught them to write me up, I don't give a f*** and you can stuff it up your ass too. Tell my boss I said that." It was a little extreme, but I was pushed to the point. When I went back in, I knew I was in deep because the guy walked out of my shop's head's office and got called right in. When I went in there, the shop head said, "I heard what happened out there. Submit the days you want to take leave right now, and I'll approve it for you." Then told me I could leave. That's all I heard about it. I was shocked. Story 21. Nobody so far has given an example of when they did it and got fired, so I will, but some details are changed for privacy. So I worked at a terrible retail boutique in college, worked my way up to management. Their pay policies were illegal, and the idiot district director they hired staffed terribly. I worked open to close by myself multiple times. I finally locked up in the middle of the day to go take a break once, got caught. I was told that if I did it again, I'd be fired. I said stop staffing, so they did it again. I locked up again and a customer called corporate. I was fired. The last laugh was on them because I threatened to sue them for violating employment law. Longer backstory not for here. Sure did. Class action. Multi-million-dollar settlement going back lost wages for 1,000 plus employees across multiple states. Plus unemployment for me. Actually, what led to a complete life change for me, and I wouldn't be as successful now had I just let them continue to abuse me. Short-term financial pain and scary when you don't know how you will afford food or how to pay bills. I made it through and definitely worth it. Not only for me, but a lot of people benefited. Fuck you, PK Company, you piece of shit. You don't deserve to still be in business.
My boss is a tuck your shirt in, no, among other things. So I found a loophole in the dress code where I don't have to tuck in my shirt. What things have you done by the book just to piss off your boss? Story 1. Used to work at a TV station. Absolutely awful management and horrible bosses. Complained about it to friends all the time. Some would even ask me on Facebook about my job and I would reply, but I knew I could get fired for speaking ill of the company. So I read the HR handbook and found out that as long as I don't specifically name the company, I can't be fired for it. So about a month later, I realize I can't take this crap anymore and post on Facebook how terrible my job is, never mentioning the company by name. They fired me a day later. I gladly walked out of that building and into a lawyer's office, got $17,800 my yearly salary. Seriously. Feels good, man. Story 2. I used to work at the Jaws ride at Universal Studios, Florida. Our uniform consisted of a blue t-shirt, jeans or jean shorts, white socks and white shoes. The unofficial dress code had all of us girls wearing jean shorts and white knee socks. One summer I ended up working the Jaws ride and the Jungle Cruise at Walt Disney World simultaneously. I loved Disney and had always wanted to work there, but I ended up finding it stifling with all sorts of silly and over-the-top rules. At the Jungle Cruise, you wear a khaki shirt, khaki shorts or pants, white socks, and brown shoes. One day, I didn't have any normal-sized socks to wear to the Jungle Cruise, so I ended up wearing my white knee-highs, which looked ridiculous with the jungle costume. When I got to work, one of my managers flipped his crap, told me my socks weren't in compliance with the Disney look, the official policies on how to dress at Disney, and made me roll my socks down. It looked like I was wearing little white life preservers around my ankles, and looked more out of place than they looked originally. I was annoyed, so when I went home, I scoured my Disney look booklet for the policies pertaining to socks. All I could find was that socks had to be long enough to cover the ankle bone. There was no maximum height. Hell, I could have worn white tights under my khaki shorts if I really wanted to. The next day, I wore my knee-highs again as a small act of rebellion. The same manager was there and he flipped out. He actually pulled me into the office to write me up, but before he could get me to sign the paperwork, I pulled out my copy of the Disney look and showed him that, while incredibly silly looking, my socks were perfectly acceptable and that I would continue wearing them like that. And so I did. I looked stupid, but I didn't care. Working for Disney wasn't a pleasant experience in my opinion, and it was very liberating to know that I could at least wear my socks however the hell I wanted to. Story 3. I used to work for this small town, twice-weekly newspaper. The editor, publisher, mayor, county commissioner, and a few other people were skimming tax dollars. When I confronted my boss about it, he told me he'd blackball me if I said anything. So I went to the local television station, tipped them off, and they uncovered the story. When they won their awards, my name was added to the list of reporters. I still can't get a job as a journalist, but damn if it didn't feel good. Story 4. My brother-in-law worked for UPS for 17 years. He was a bit of a joker and was constantly getting in trouble for coming to work with crazy hair colours or cornrows. He was a big Italian guy and was told it wasn't appropriate. It was always something, but they couldn't say anything about him wearing sunglasses. So his little rebellion was, he would wear the most outrageous sunglasses he could think of. Ones shaped like giant red lips, guitars with stems sticking up, and purple ones with rhinestone hearts on them. Anything for a laugh. After a while, people knew him by his glasses. If someone said they lived in a certain area, I would say, "Oh, my brother-in-law is your UPS man, the guy with the crazy glasses." And their reply would almost always be something like, "Ah, John. Yeah, I love that guy. He's hilarious." He passed away 4 years ago. He was hit by a drunk driver while he was out walking one night. When we attended his funeral, all of the guys from work came dressed in their browns with crazy sunglasses on. His best friend gave his eulogy wearing a pair of neon green glasses 3 times the size of his face. And the pastor even borrowed John's guitar glasses when he went up to speak. After his funeral, we counted. He had over 200 different pairs. What started as him being a pain in the ass to his boss ended as a tribute to his character in the life of always wanting to make someone else smile. Story 5. While I was in the Navy, it was recommended that I get extensive surgery on my ankle. My command felt that I didn't deserve a bunch of time off for a surgery, so they said they would approve it, but none of the convalescent leave. They refused to sign any paperwork. The first thing I did was hit them with the regulation stating that they were required to respond to all requests within a certain amount of time, 3 days, I think. They responded with a no. So then I had the Navy legal draw up the paperwork, in accordance with regulations, that my command would be responsible for 100% of my medical care if they did not abide by doctor's orders. I then let them know that would mean that all of my medical care would then be handled by civilians and the command would be responsible for paying the bill out of their budget. They approved my surgery, convalescent leave, and convalescent leave extension. Story 6. Not so much a tuck-in-shirt nasty situation, but here goes. My boss went away for about 3 to 4 weeks for a conference, and while he was away, a workmate and I had an idea, a George Foreman grill, and then we'd go to the deli and grab stuff for lunch. Hamburgers, lamb chops, pork, steaks, etc. We did this every day for over a month, and when the boss got back, he put a stop to it, with the exact words, "I don't want that thing inside the office." So we took it to the shared kitchen area on our floor. We rented a suite. When he got angry at that and said, "I don't want it on this floor," we took it down to the underground parking area and used the power outlet at his parking space while he was out at lunch. He caught us because he was coming back from lunch with a business partner, in the car with him, and we were hunched over a tiny George Foreman grill making hamburger patties. Imagine 3 IT guys, crouching on the ground like cavemen, in a poorly lit underground parking lot, cooking hamburgers on the concrete floor. Yeah, it went over about as well as you would think. If he didn't specifically use the words, "take that home," or "I will break it and throw it in the trash," our next step was to use the PowerPoint in the parking lot of the church directly opposite the building and facing his office. Story 7. Not my story, but a co-worker. Worked at a water park. The supervisor was a witch who wouldn't let the lead guards at the top of the tallest slide in the park go to the bathroom. The guard at the top is radioing that he needs to take a but she won't let him. Mind you, the lead guards are allowed to ride down every once in a while to make sure no tubes are stuck. The lead guard is about to shit his pants in front of a ton of guests, so he goes into the utility closet and craps in a bucket of cat litter we kept to clean up vomit. He then proceeds to ride the slide down to clean himself off and leaves the supervisor to clean up his bucket of crap. Story 8. Back when I was working and attending classes, I would go straight from campus to work, getting me there anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes early before my shift. On occasion, my boss would ask me to help him out with something before I clock on, put something away or answer the phone. Over the span of a couple of months, this evolved from occasionally to every day your shift starts when you get here. After doing this for a couple of weeks, still clocking in at my usual 3 p.m, I decided that if I'm working for a few extra minutes each day, I'm going to get paid for it. I did this once, and I didn't make it an hour into my shift before my boss is screaming at me and throwing down the employee handbook saying that I'm only allowed to clock in 5 minutes before and after my scheduled shift. Needless to say, I made it a point to not check in until 5 minutes after my scheduled shift every day, no matter how early I was. Fast forward 3 months, and my boss gets fired. He got what was coming to him. Story 9. When I was in the army, I pulled my car up to an ATM machine on base to get cash. 4 guys piled out, leaving all doors open. While getting my cash, from somewhere behind me someone says, "You actually drive that piece of crap? I should call in for a tow truck." Without bothering to turn around, I yelled back, "Screw you and your tow truck!" I never did see who it was as he was gone by the time I had my money. The next day, my squad leader calls me aside and asks me if I told the sergeant to go screw himself yesterday, and I had to admit that yes, I probably had. So I was in trouble. I had 3 other witnesses who were interviewed and signed sworn statements about the fact that I had told a staff sergeant to go screw himself and a tow truck. I was given the opportunity to read the incriminating statements before I made my own, just to point out that there was no point in lying. That was when I found out that only one guy had even known who it was because he was in civilian clothes, not on duty. So my statement detailed an aggressively profane and hostile person in civilian attire, identity unknown to me, whom I found to be acting irrationally, and attempted to diffuse further confrontation by responding jovially in kind fashion. The beauty was, without reading the other statements, I'd have been unable to mesh my version of events so perfectly with the bland facts the others reported. The key point is under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There is no such thing as disrespecting a non-commissioned officer, only insubordination, which is very clear about being in uniform. At this point, everyone decided the best thing to do was to sweep it under the rug as the sergeant had far more to lose than I did, and magically everything went away. The sergeant continued to be a dick to me at every opportunity, so I made it a point of yelling, "Hey P, screw you," whenever I saw him out of uniform. Eventually my squad leader asked me to stop as a personal favour to him, so I did. But it was fun for a while. Story 10. On the flip side, I'm the boss enforcing policy. When I took over the department, the old boss told me that the reason the place looked like crap was that when he asked a sales associate, base pay plus commission, to clean or put up stock, they claimed it wasn't in their job description. The main boss backed them up, calling it a technicality. I pulled out the description and read out other duties as assigned by the manager on the last line. 2 out of 9 quit. My department is now clean and stock is always up. Sales are consistently up. I'm cool with that. Story 11. When I was working at Office Max about 10 years ago, I was the only employee who didn't smoke. Needless to say, everyone in the building took a 15-minute smoke break 2 to 3 times a shift, and I got squat. One day, I asked the manager if I could have a clean air break, and he was confused. I explained that since smokers can have their 15 minutes breaks 2 to 3 times a shift, I should be able to step outside and do the same without having to smoke. Irked my manager, but he knew he had to let me to avoid any discrimination. Story 12. Not really my boss, but my school principal, which was really like a boss to me as a kid. I was at an Opus Dei school, so the nuns were pretty strict, and I hated the salads they gave us. I found multiple ways to hide the food because you can't throw food when there are millions of people starving. Until one day, I just went with a tray half full to dump it all. The nun went ballistic, and I just said, "I'm full, gluttony is a sin," and threw it all. That got me in trouble. I was 9. Story 13. I did a lot of things at my last job just to piss off management. One thing that they really hated was this. At our store, they wanted a minimum of 70% of our transactions to be membership transactions. So either someone with a membership, or we sign someone up for a membership. I would, for a few days in a row, get 100% by only ringing one person through on my whole shift and making them use or sign up for a membership. And then randomly, I'd ring someone through and make sure I don't use their membership card, so that day I would be at 0%. When they'd come to me and rant that my percentage was 0, I'd tell them that I'd been 100% all week and that it was only one transaction that I did that day, and the person didn't want to sign up. They couldn't get mad at me for 0% on one person, you can't win them all, and they couldn't get mad at me for only ringing in one person every other day because my numbers were 100%. It annoyed the hell out of them, but on paper, it looked great. Bonus story. When I quit, I hid 105 pictures of myself all over the store. They still haven't found them all. Story 14. Back in high school, which was a public school, a small group of students, including myself, and a few teachers were going on a rare trip out of state. I was one of those punk kids, ruffians, hoodlums, big pants, dark blue hair, and white-out contacts. But I was also at near the top of the class. We arrived at the airport shortly before the flight. This was a few years before 9/11, pretty much dressed like a Mormon with clear contacts and my dark blue hair. We were going someplace directly after our short flight, so we were supposed to be presentable. One of the chaperones, a school counselor who was quite familiar with me, it was a small school so everyone knew me, asked me, "Are you serious?" "Not usually, but what are you talking about?" I asked. She goes on about how my unnatural hair color is a distraction and that it reflects poorly on the school and our presence at this conference. As a side note, for several months leading up to this point, my hair had been a variety of colors, including some bright, annoying concoctions, like magenta and turquoise. She then calls the principal over and asks her to send me home to make my hair look natural. I used the good stuff, semi-permanent hair dye, professionally done by a friend who was a hairdresser, so it wasn't changing anytime soon. The principal, who I considered a friend, looks at me and asks me what I thought. I respond that the counselor's choice of hair color, orange blonde, was not natural either. I went on that trip, and the country folk loved this city boy's funny hair. Story 15. When I was in grade 4, pizza was sold at lunch for $1.50 a slice. I saw a business opportunity and went to the Little Caesars, a stone's throw away from the school, and bought 10 hot and ready $5 pizzas and sold the slices for $1, $1.25 on Friday. When the school told me I couldn't sell pizza on school property, I moved my office to my aunt's house, which was next door. So every day at lunch, the kids would walk to the neighbor's front yard, buy pizza, and come back to school. I was making a tidy sum every day. Story 16. When I worked at Best Buy, the dress code was black shoes, pants, a belt, and tucked blue shirt. Never wore a belt nor tucked my shirt in because as a chubster, when kneeling and organizing DVDs on the bottom shelf, my shirt comes untucked, and the belt cuts into my belly. First world problems, huh? Anyways, my boss would constantly freak on me for not having my shirt tucked in, and finally got on my case for not wearing a belt either. So I checked the dress code and found it said belt if there are belt loops on the pants or something. So I found an X-Acto knife and cut off my belt loops. The next morning I come in and she says, "Where's your belt?" I grinned at her and said, "Where's my belt loops?" and gave her the biggest grin I could muster. One of my finest moments. Story 17. Yet another high school story. So 6 or 7 years ago, when the torn-up jeans look was in my school, passed a rule prohibiting jeans with large holes in them. Most teachers only really cared about the rule if the hole was showing inappropriate amounts of skin, like near the ass or crotch. But there was one teacher that took it to mean any hole was forbidden. She was a PE teacher, and if she saw you with a hole in your jeans, she would make you either change or send you to the vice principal's office to get it sorted out. I had her in my 2 end-of-period class, and one day I wore an old pair of ridiculously comfortable jeans that over time had worn a relatively small hole just under one of the knees. She flipped out and made me change into my smelly gym shorts, and I had to spend the rest of the day smelling like ball sweat. I tried to tell her how absurd it was that the amount of skin now showing after I changed to shorts was way more than before in my worn jeans, but she just ignored it and continued to cite the no holes rule back at me. That night I took an old, ratty pair of jeans that barely fit anymore and took sandpaper to the knees so that each side had a decent-sized hole in it. The next day I made a point to sit in the front of her class, wearing my fresh, holy jeans so she would call me out on them. When she called me out, I calmly stood up and walked to my backpack and pulled out a pair of scissors. In front of her and the entire class, I proceeded to cut the jeans where the holes were and turn them into jean shorts. Yeah, jorts. And sat back down silently. She was incredibly pissed off, but knew she couldn't do anything about my no-holes jorts. Story 18. When Circuit City was still in business, I worked in the warehouse. For whatever reason, they had a strict dress policy of khaki pants and this awful collar shirt that also had to be tucked in. This went for everyone, even the warehouse. I discovered through an old warehouse employee guide, shoved in a drawer years ago and forgotten about, that as long as warehouse employees had khaki-colored shorts with no cargo pockets and a t-shirt with a Circuit City logo, there would be no problem. Circuit City stopped making Circuit City t-shirts long before I started, but thanks to a local Salvation Army, I was able to pick up 2 Circuit City t-shirts and a quick trip to Target for some shorts, and my new uniform was set. My managers were not happy about my appearance, claiming I looked sloppy and unkempt. Even better, when the giant black dude, who hated his job, just slept in the back and talked on his cell phone all day, from the warehouse found out about this. He too had some old Circuit City t-shirts and joined in. Management hated us working together. I miss Circuit City. Story 19. I used to work at a lingerie store as an assistant manager, so I had to dress nice and look professional. All the other girls wore high heels and always ended up complaining about how sore their feet were at the end of their shift, and I always wore flats to avoid having sore feet. They were still nice, stylish shoes, but they didn't have towering heels on them. My manager always used to get mad at me for not wearing heels and tried to claim it was part of the dress code. I looked it up and showed her that it didn't say anywhere that I had to wear heels, just that I had to wear acceptable work attire or something like that, and she tried to tell me it was an out-of-date dress code or something, so I would tell her that she should get an updated one then. Eventually she brought the head office into the argument and the provincial manager was trying to tell me to wear heels to work. I told them they would have to pay me more than minimum wage to ruin my feet. I did not get a raise and no one ever told me to wear heels to work again. Story 20. I was in the army for 4 years, as an intelligence analyst in an infantry division. I volunteered for a training exercise where I had to be a bad guy. 3 months before the exercise, I was told a bit about the training and also given a form signed by the colonel, a big deal in an infantry unit, to stop shaving. It was pretty bad having a no-shaving waiver and a 3-month beard while still having to be in uniform and wear a beret every day. As a lower-ranked guy, E4, for the first week, anyone who outranked me would either talk to me or just start to yell at me and demand push-ups, which made me quickly produce the colonel-signed waiver and shut them up. Never with a "my bad," usually just a mean look. After a week or two, they left me alone and just knew I was that guy with the beard. I think I smiled more while getting dirty looks in those 90 days than in any other 90-day stretch in the army.
What is the most unreasonable thing you've been asked to do at work? Story 1. Got asked by my boss to go to the building site next door and ask the builders to stop construction as they were being too loud, not for a specific length of time, just to stop working. I had to ask him what he thought that would actually achieve. Story 2. A while back, there was a carpenter renovating the office next to ours. My boss went next door and yelled at him, "You should do this after hours. Do you like listening to hammering and sawing all day while you're at work?" The carpenter said, "Actually, yes, I do." Story 3. Friend of mine was doing some remodeling on an empty office suite with his 2 sons, one a Finnish carpenter and the other an electrician, in order to get it ready for the next tenant. So, noise, some mess, some inconvenience for the others who leased space in the office building on that floor. Douche across the hall complains, the same thing. They should be working at night. He couldn't get anything done with all the noise, and they were making a mess. He was pissed and was going to call the leasing agent to complain. My buddy tells the guy to call the building owner instead, as the leasing agent would just blow him off. Larry says, "Here, I have his card and number right here." Mr. Business Guy dials the number and Larry's cell phone rings. The guy looks at Larry all puzzled. Larry tells him, "I own this building, bud." Story 4. I was asked to lay off a group of employees for another manager. She begged me to do it, and I initially refused. This manager selected and approved the list of people being let go and was 100% responsible for even needing a layoff. She overhired in her area because she misrepresented her projected needs and let her group's performance fall below standard. No one wants to be part of a layoff on the receiving or giving side unless you're a total sadist. And I really believe if you are laying your people off, you need to have the balls to do it yourself. Period. I wound up doing it because everyone in the building already figured out something was happening based on her behavior, and it seemed excessively cruel to postpone things since everyone was on edge. I felt like the angel of that day. People couldn't even make eye contact with me as I walked the halls, because if I stopped at someone's desk, they knew they were losing their job. My people were terrified, and I still feel terrible about how that day went down because I couldn't say anything until it was done. Layoffs are horrible, and this manager hiding from their responsibility made it even worse. Fortunately, my boss agreed, and he fired her for it. Story 5. Back when I was the manager of a movie theater, I had just gotten done working for 14 hours because someone called in sick and tried to submit payroll to accounting. The fax wouldn't go through. Asked the accountant to go to the office about 2 blocks from her home and see if she could fix it. She said she was too tired and that I should instead drive the 50 miles to hand deliver it. I ended up doing it because if I didn't, then my staff wouldn't get paid. But there were about 8 nasty emails I sent afterward to various higher-ups. A few weeks later, I quit that job to become a busboy. Single best career move I've ever made. Story 6. Not as horrifying as some of the others, but in the early 90s, I worked at a well-known U.S. depot for office supplies. One time, for various reasons I never understood, an edict came down that a certain class of inventory was to be destroyed and discarded. That meant that perfectly good merchandise, including office furniture, lamps, computers, printers, copiers, fax machines, and some other random bits, was to be taken out back and literally smashed to pieces with a hammer, then thrown in the bin. The most amazing part was that under no circumstances was this stuff allowed to be given away, sold, or otherwise allowed to survive and benefit anyone. Several employees begged and pleaded to be allowed to buy some of the things, but nope. Better to destroy it and get nothing in return. It wasn't a huge number of items, but it was easily $10,000 worth of stuff. Story 7. We used to have to destroy hundreds and hundreds of books at my job, and we weren't allowed to do anything with them but put them in the recycling bin. This is called stripping a book. Strip because this process involves tearing off the front cover to be sent back to the publisher as proof of destruction, and then the actual book discarded. I felt like my heart was being ripped out when I had to strip my favorite books and throw them away. At one point, my staff recommendation was The Hunger Games, not long after it came out, and at the height of its popularity, I had to strip 300 copies of it because my assistant manager decided we had too many copies, and she was sick of looking at the boxes in the back room, the storage room, where overstock is supposed to be. And this is a book that we literally could not stop selling because it was so popular. The biggest burn of it all, when our computer system saw we had suddenly lost 300 copies from the store, it ordered us 500 more. I warned the assistant manager what would happen, but she said it wouldn't. They used to allow employees to take stripped books, but that ended after I'd only been with the company a couple of years. Whenever we had to strip hundreds of copies of children's books, I'd get so upset since there are so many schools and children who'd love to have these books. The reason we didn't donate is that after a book is stripped and processed out, the book is once again the property of the publisher. For the publishers, it's much easier and more cost-effective to destroy the books than have them returned to them. As for why publishers won't let the bookstores donate the books, well, you'd have to ask them. And bookstores, mine at least, can't sneakily donate the books instead of recycling them because that would be fraud and theft, which could get the bookstore sued or their relationship with the publisher ended. Story 8. Worked at a grocery chain as a courtesy utility clerk. The vendor for 7-Up and Dr. Pepper screwed up stacking their pallets, so they all fell over, creating a nice pile of broken glass, sticky soda, and wet, messy cardboard. Boss made me clean it all up and told me not to leave it even for a second. Got it all cleaned up in about 2 hours. Not bad, save for me nearly getting shanked by some large glass shards on the floor. But where it became unreasonable was the very next day. I got called into the office and written up by the same boss. Why? I had failed to do floor inspections. He expected me to be able to be in 2 places at once. That was fun to contest. Story 9. When I was 18, I worked part-time at UPS and also part-time at Burger King, which was more of a way to eat for free every day than anything else. This was in 2000 or 2001, so the minimum wage was still $4.25, $5.15, and I wasn't making much more than that at BK. I'm working the drive-thru window one night when a visibly intoxicated couple comes into the dining room and orders some food. My manager was working the register, and one other guy was there cooking the food. The drunks ordered a bunch of deep-fried stuff, and we didn't have enough chicken tenders on hold, so the manager told them it was going to be a couple of minutes while the tenders and fries cooked. No problem, they're going to use the restroom. The restrooms were down a hall, and the doors faced each other, so we didn't think anything of it when they went down the hall together. Their order comes up, and they're not back yet, so we bag it up and leave it under the heat lamps while we wait for them. 2 minutes turn into 5, and I'm busy at the drive-thru window, so I half forgot about them. An indeterminate amount of time goes by, probably 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, and my manager asks me if I expedited that order, gave them their food. I tell her no, they never came back for their food after going to the bathroom. She goes into the women's room, doesn't see anyone, then opens the door to the men's room. I heard her dry heave from my station at the window, a good 20 feet or 6 meters away. She came around the wall that separated the dining area from the work area, and it looked like she'd seen a ghost or a dead body. I asked her what was wrong, and she just shook her head, telling me that she would take over the drive-thru window because I had to clean the bathroom. I geared up with elbow-length gloves, goggles, dust mask, and slickers, not knowing what kind of hell was unleashed in that stall. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw in there. It looked like they hooked up a colostomy bag full of mostly liquid shit and semi-chunky vomit to a paint sprayer and blasted every single surface in there with the poop and puke. The stall was caked. The door handle had poo smeared on it. There was vomit in the sink, next to the sink, in the trash can, next to the trash can, and just everywhere I looked, there was poop, puke, or both. I didn't even make it 3 steps into the room before my gag reflex reminded me that it existed. My eyes were watering, my stomach was doing somersaults, and I was choking back my own barrage of puke when it hit me. Hey, screw this. Nope, not a freaking chance. I choked out through gasps of air. Not a freaking chance in hell I'm cleaning that up. Call hazmat. Half joking, not thinking my manager would actually expect me to clean that up. Boy, was I ever wrong. Hey, if that bathroom isn't clean by the end of your shift, then don't bother coming back. She didn't get to finish the sentence. I'd already thrown my hat and shirt on the floor. Sorry, Jill, but you don't pay me nearly enough for this crap. I can find another crappy minimum wage job tomorrow. Good luck with that debacle in there. And just like the phantom puke poopers, I was gone. Story 10. I used to work in a restaurant that was above a pro shop, golf. Across the street was a ski area, Bear Mountain, California, and the guy that owned the restaurant where I worked also owned the seasonal snack bar / restaurant in the chalet at the bottom of the ski slope. He had a big chest freezer in the chalet where he kept a bunch of meat, and some doofus turned off all the electricity, including that going to the freezer, when the ski slope shut down for the season. My boss didn't discover it for almost 2 months. He told me, I have an unpleasant job for you to do, but you have to do it. When he lifted the lid on the freezer, the shock of how bad it smelled literally made me vomit right there on the floor. I could tell my boss was close to hurling as well, but he'd already been exposed to the horror once already, so he was prepared. He told me to put it all in garbage bags and tote it out to the dumpster, bin bags and wheelie bin for you Brits. He told me that dealing with the smell and the slime was really nothing more than mind over matter. He looked me square in the eye and told me, I don't mind, so it doesn't matter. I was 14 years old and living on my own. I needed that job. I did it. Story 11. Retired medic. I was told to immediately place a freshly delivered newborn back inside the mother. She was delivered in a transport ambulance en route to Weill Cornell and lost it that her baby wasn't born in a hospital and further, not born in a good hospital. The mother told me to hold the baby in with your hand. I explained it wouldn't work and that we were having this child on 3rd Avenue in the middle 50s and she flipped. So she and I had an agreement. I would say the baby was still inside her body till we backed up at the hospital. I guess this satisfied the requirement of being born at a hospital versus next to a dry cleaners on 3rd Avenue. So as far as that kid knows, she was born in the Weill Cornell ER ambulance bay. Story 12. I was making $12 an hour as an office temp at a government office. My boss filled a box full of pepper spray, flares, and flashbangs. She then labeled it toiletries and told me to take it to air cargo and send it off on a passenger flight to one of our sites. I didn't want to go to jail for causing a mid-air accident, so I took the stuff for myself and distributed it to other projects within the same government department. A few weeks went by as they tried to determine what happened to their stuff. Finally, my boss came into my office and said, "This is theft over $1,000. We'll have to get the RCMP, Federal Police, involved." I told her, "You can't do that without implicating yourself in a worse crime. You just forget about the whole matter." A week later, they canceled my contract with the temp agency and hired me directly at $24 an hour, plus benefits. Story 13. It's expected of us to challenge shoplifters at Asda, Walmart. Getting a knife pulled on me to stop a guy with a pork joint or block of cheese? Not my job. Also, when the frozen delivery has been stood untouched in a sweltering warehouse for 4 hours, the ice cream is liquid and the frozen chicken has fully defrosted. Nope, not for me. The deputy manager threw a hissy fit because I said no and she had to do it herself. Aside from the fact I was 5 hours into a 6-hour shift, just about to go on my break after being left alone on my own to run an entire department before she asked me, while she and the supervisors had all had their break and tossed it off for the morning, giving someone food poisoning and leaving myself open to get sued isn't worth the £6.70-something that we get paid. Story 14. Bartender. On Good Friday at 9 p.m., a lady had the nerve to ask me to tell another customer to quit swearing because it was Good Friday. I told her as nicely as I could that we're all adults and that I simply wouldn't feel okay with telling another paying customer to stop swearing. My boss saw the conversation and me walking away while she had a sour expression on her face. He asked me what that was about, so I told him. He actually had the nerve to tell me that I needed to go tell the guy to watch his mouth. Now keep in mind, my boss was a cool guy, so I could speak openly to him. Not the best bar manager, he was a banker before and got the job because he was the owner's friend and just got tired of banking. So I responded to him like I wish I could have responded to her, which was something along the lines of, "If the sanctimonious girl is so freaking worried about swearing on Good Friday, what the hell is she doing in a sports bar drinking? I literally will walk out of this job right now before I impose her will on another customer because of her beliefs." To which he said, "Good point, screw her." Story 15. In the Army, during my mandatory service, I'm Finnish, we had just completed yearly maintenance to our bandwagon. It took like 3 hours to do, and we checked, fixed, and replaced everything that was needed. So we went outside to breathe some fresh air and smoked cigarettes. As I came back, alone, I saw our Sarge inspecting the vehicle. He asked if we got the maintenance done, and I answered that we just had it done. He looks at me, then looks back at our bandwagon and says, "It's 1 p.m. Now you and your group go to eat lunch, and when you come back, you do it again." Needless to say, we just acted like we were doing it the rest of the day. Story 16. A manager asked me to wrap my arm up in a bin bag and stick my hand into a toilet to try and unblock it. I was a waiter, barman, taking food out to customers. Highlighted this to him, and he insisted that I do it. I promptly told him to screw off and mentioned health and safety. He ended up doing it. On a side note, he was fired 2 weeks later for making inappropriate comments to female staff members. He was a dude. Story 17. I was working as a mechanic at a crappy hood repair shop. The bathroom hadn't been cleaned for years. There was poo built up in a ring in the toilet, and dirt all over the walls, sink, and everywhere. It would be cleaner to take a dump outside and rub the excrement all over yourself, seriously. One day, when we were slow, my boss told me to clean the bathroom. I told him no. He told me again. I told him no, again. He kept telling me again for the next few hours, getting angrier each time. I told him he can tell me all he wants, but that wasn't part of my job description, and I wasn't going to do it. I walked by the bathroom later, and the oil change tire guy, who had crazy baby mamas showing up constantly and chained his pit bulls up outside the shop every day, was in there with a pressure washer. Felt bad for him, but was happy that I wouldn't keep getting told to do it. Story 18. I was an Army officer, and at the time, a company commander. Not only was I instructed to assist in the sweeping of a wreck under the rug, but was ordered to appoint, as my acting company first sergeant, top sergeant for the company, a man I had relieved of his duty position and assigned to a desk for misconduct with female trainees. I refused and actually got the victim the medical and mental assistance she needed. He was still assigned the post by higher command, and less than 2 weeks later, I lost my command for creating a work environment so hostile I had lost the confidence of the NCOs/sergeant. Still don't regret it, even though it eventually cost me my career. Story 19. When I was about 16, I got hired to do a cleanup on a paint factory that was over 100 years old. They had big-ass Varsol paint thinner tanks on a hill behind the plant that was gravity-fed into the factory and had clogged. The boss wanted us to physically climb down into the tank, which was waist-deep full of Varsol, and remove it all with 5-gallon buckets. This was a while ago back in Newfoundland, and safety gear didn't exist on the island yet. We all refused, and after that spent most of our time smoking dope on the roof. We all got fired a few days later, although some of the other stuff we did there will probably show up as some strange form of cancer at some point in the future. Story 20. My first summer job in high school was at Subway. Typical absurdity with customers, broken AC in one of the stores my boss owned, blah blah, whatever. One day, I came in for the closing shift and saw my boss getting ready to leave, which was not unusual. He frequently worked the opening shift and would stay through lunch, and then spent the rest of the day in and out of both of his stores. I was the first of 3 people coming in for this shift change. I'm catching up with him for a few minutes, and in the course of this conversation, he says, "Hey, there's a bat outside by the dumpsters. Can you guys try to trap it today when you get a few minutes? My wife has a bat house." This is the story of how I found myself with one of my coworkers spending 15 minutes standing by the dumpsters in the middle of the afternoon, half-heartedly trying to scoop a bat that was hanging in a corner into a large Subway cup without touching it. We failed. So then that is the story of how when my boss came back to the store, he disappeared for a bit and came back with a bat in a cup for his wife's bat house. No rabies was acquired by any party. No word on whether the bat was pleased with her relocation. Story 21. I had been offered a job from an old friend that was triple the weekly wage I was earning at a camera store for the same hours, and it didn't require me to serve customers. I handed in my letter of resignation, and the manager looked me dead in the eye and requested I didn't quit, otherwise the owners would be deported. He was 100% serious and maintained eye contact whilst I was trying my best not to laugh at the concept of store owners being deported over a casual employee resigning. Story 22. I was doing some man nannying for this crazy lady last summer. She had hired me to take care of the kids, but it was mainly housework. She was an extreme hypochondriac who obsessively made me wash my hands after I touched any surface, not exaggerating, and would make you wash the bottom of your shoes if you went outside and came back in. She would constantly be on me for not cleaning the kitchen, but I was not allowed in the kitchen at the same time as her, so she would literally be in the kitchen saying, "Why isn't the kitchen clean yet?" I would have to sit on the outside threshold and jump in the second she left, or else she would freak out. Then she would come storming back in, and I would have to jump out and explain why I wasn't working, because you freak out if I'm in the kitchen at the same time. Then, once in the kitchen, I could only use the sponge and gloves on the left side of the sink, and I was only allowed to touch dirty dishes, never ever clean dishes once the dishwasher was done. I once had to wipe every knob in the house with hydrogen peroxide because strangers had done some work and had touched all the knobs. So the moral of the story is, if you ever nanny, get to know or ask around about the mom first. Story 23. I'm in the Navy, and I had to sweep water off of the pier as it was raining.